David, a young shepherd, faced the giant Goliath with nothing but faith, courage, and a slingshot. In that moment, he didn't just defeat a man. He changed the course of Israel's history. Have you ever felt like you were facing an insurmountable challenge with no way to win? David's story teaches us that with God on our side, no obstacle is too big to overcome. In this video, we'll dive into how David's courage and trust in God brought victory against all odds, inspiring us to stand firm in our own faith when life seems impossible. Are you ready to discover how David's story can encourage you to face your own giants and trust God for your victory? Before we dive deeper, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps spread these powerful lessons to others. Let's explore how David's story can strengthen your faith and equip you for the challenges ahead. At the time of David, Israel was under constant threat from the Philistines, a powerful enemy nation that was determined to conquer Israel. The Philistines had gathered an army to challenge Israel, and their champion was a giant named Goliath. Goliath was a warrior so large and intimidating that he instilled fear in the hearts of the Israelites. Every day, he would come out and challenge the Israelites to send someone to fight him, but no one dared to accept. The fear of Goliath paralyzed the Israeli army, and for 40 days they stood in fear, unable to take action. During this time, God had already chosen David to be the future king of Israel, although he was not yet a recognized leader. David was the youngest of 8 brothers, and he came from a humble family in Bethlehem. While his brothers were fighting in the Israelite army, David was tending to his family's sheep. Despite his youth and inexperience in warfare, God saw something special in David, a heart full of faith and courage. God rejected Saul, the current king, and chose David to eventually replace him, showing that God's choice often goes beyond outward appearances or social status. David's selection as king wasn't because of his physical strength or military experience, but because of his heart for God. While most would have overlooked a young shepherd boy, God saw in David the qualities of a future leader. David was not only a man after God's own heart, but he also had a deep trust in God's power and promises. While Israel was focused on military strength, God focused on David's character, knowing that David's faith and trust in God would lead him to be a great king. As a shepherd, David had already developed skills that would later serve him well as a leader. Although being a shepherd might seem like a simple and lowly job, it taught David valuable lessons in courage, leadership, and faith. David spent his days protecting the sheep from wild animals, like lions and bears. This experience gave him the confidence and trust in God that he would later need when facing Goliath. His work as a shepherd also gave him time to develop a close relationship with God, through prayer and worship, which formed the foundation of his faith. David's role as a shepherd also prepared him to protect and care for the people of Israel. Just as he protected his sheep, David would later be called to protect Israel as its king. His love and dedication to those under his care showed that he was ready to lead God's people, even though he was still young. God was preparing him, not through formal military training, but by teaching him to rely on God's strength and guidance, which was far more important for the challenges ahead. In summary, while Israel faced a great threat from the Philistines, God had already chosen David, the young shepherd, to be the future king. His faith, courage, and trust in God, developed during his time as a shepherd, were key qualities that prepared him to face the giants of his time. David's story teaches us that God sees the heart and prepares us for the challenges we will face, even in seemingly ordinary circumstances. His time as a shepherd was not just a preparation for battle, but for leadership, showing that God uses the humble and the faithful to accomplish great things. Goliath, the giant warrior of the Philistine army, stood on the battlefield every day, mocking and challenging the Israelites. Instead of engaging in a full-scale battle, Goliath proposed a one-on-one fight, where the winner would decide the fate of both armies. His challenge was simple: send out a warrior to fight him, and if that warrior defeated him, the Philistines would surrender. However, Goliath was so large and intimidating, standing over 9 feet tall, that the entire Israelite army was terrified. Even King Saul, who was a warrior himself, was paralyzed by fear. For 40 days, Goliath taunted the Israelites, and no one dared to accept his challenge. David, a young shepherd, was sent by his father to the battlefield to bring food to his brothers, who were part of Saul's army. When David heard Goliath's challenge, he was shocked to see that no one was stepping up to fight the giant. Despite being just a boy, David's faith in God was strong. He couldn't understand why the Israelite army, who were God's chosen people, were allowing a pagan giant to mock them. David boldly declared that he would fight Goliath, trusting in God to deliver him from the giant. His confidence came not from his physical strength or experience, but from his deep faith that God was bigger than any challenge. David's willingness to face Goliath was an act of incredible courage. His brothers and the rest of the army thought he was being reckless, but David knew that God had always been with him as he protected his sheep from lions and bears. When King Saul heard about David's determination, he initially tried to discourage him, saying that David was too young and inexperienced to face such a powerful enemy. But David persisted, telling Saul about how God had helped him defeat wild animals in the past and would help him defeat Goliath as well. David was not relying on traditional weapons or armor. He was relying solely on the power of God. Saul finally agreed to let David fight, but he offered him his own armor. David tried it on, but it was too heavy and cumbersome for him. He had no need for such things, as he trusted in God's strength rather than weapons. Instead, David chose to fight with what he knew best, a sling and 5 smooth stones from a nearby stream. With nothing but his faith in God and his simple weapon, David approached the battlefield, ready to face the giant. The moment of confrontation was intense. Goliath, seeing a young boy approaching with only a sling, laughed and mocked David, underestimating him completely. But David responded with confidence, saying, "You come against me with sword and spear, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty." As Goliath moved toward him, David slung a stone at the giant, hitting him squarely in the forehead. With one shot, Goliath fell to the ground, defeated. David's victory was a powerful reminder that true strength comes not from the size or appearance of the weapon, but from God's power and faithfulness. David's victory over Goliath became a defining moment for Israel. It wasn't just the defeat of a giant, but a demonstration of the power of God to overcome impossible odds. David, though young and inexperienced, showed that faith in God can accomplish what seems impossible. The Israelites, inspired by David's courage and trust in God, were emboldened to fight, and they went on to defeat the Philistines. David's triumph over Goliath became a symbol of how God uses the unlikely and the humble to accomplish great things, reminding everyone that with God, no challenge is too big to overcome. David's unexpected victory over Goliath was a turning point for Israel. For days, the Israelites had been paralyzed by fear, unable to confront the giant warrior who taunted them. But when David, a young shepherd with no military experience, stepped up and defeated Goliath with just a sling and a stone, everything changed. His victory shattered the fear that had gripped the army and gave the Israelites a new sense of courage and hope. David's triumph was a clear sign that, with God's help, even the most impossible challenges could be overcome. It was a moment that brought renewed confidence to Israel and set the stage for future victories. After his stunning victory, David quickly became a national hero. The people of Israel were amazed by his bravery and faith, and they began to recognize him as a leader. As word spread about his defeat of Goliath, David's popularity soared. The Israelite army, once fearful and disorganized, now looked up to David as a symbol of strength and courage. He was no longer just a shepherd boy but a warrior who had proven himself in battle. His victory changed the course of his life and positioned him as the future king of Israel, even though he was still young and untested as a leader. David's victory had a profound impact on his trajectory in Israel. Not only did it elevate his status among the people, but it also caught the attention of King Saul. Initially, Saul had been impressed by David's courage and had offered him a place in his service. However, as David's popularity grew, so did Saul's jealousy, and this would eventually lead to tension between them. But for the moment, David's victory over Goliath made him a figure to be reckoned with, and he was soon recognized as the man who would lead Israel to greater glory. The impact of David's victory went beyond personal recognition. It also marked a shift in the way the people of Israel viewed their relationship with God. Before David defeated Goliath, the Israelites had placed their trust in military strength, but David's victory showed them that God's power was far greater than any physical weapon. The battle was not won by the size of David's army or the strength of his weapon, but by the power of God, who guided the stone and defeated the enemy. This victory reinforced the belief that God could use anyone, regardless of their status or experience, to accomplish his purposes. David's triumph over Goliath not only brought honor to Israel but also demonstrated the greatness of God's power. It showed that God could use even the most unlikely person to bring about victory. David, a young shepherd, had no formal training or armor, yet he defeated a giant warrior, not through his own strength but by trusting in God's power. This event changed the way Israel saw themselves and their God. They were reminded that their strength didn't come from their own abilities, but from the God who fought for them. In the end, David's victory over Goliath reshaped Israel's future. It inspired the people, elevated David to a position of leadership, and demonstrated God's power in a tangible way. The victory was a reminder that with faith in God, even the most impossible odds could be overcome. It marked the beginning of a new chapter for Israel, where the people would learn to rely on God's strength and guidance in all things. David's victory was not just a personal triumph, it was a turning point for the entire nation. David's unshakable faith in God was what truly made him strong. When he stood before Goliath, he wasn't relying on physical strength, weapons, or armor, but solely on his trust in God. Unlike the soldiers of Israel, who were focused on Goliath's size and strength, David saw the battle as one between God's power and the enemy. He confidently declared to Goliath that he came in the name of the Lord Almighty, trusting that God would deliver him. His faith in God gave him the courage to face what seemed impossible, proving that true strength comes from reliance on God's power, not our own abilities. David's courage in the face of the giant Goliath teaches us an important lesson about confronting seemingly insurmountable challenges. Many of us face giants in our lives, challenges that appear too big to overcome. David's example shows us that even when the obstacles seem impossible, we can overcome them by looking beyond our own limitations and trusting in God's ability to work through us. David didn't let Goliath's size or the fear of the Israelites stop him. Instead, he focused on the greatness of God and had the courage to step into what appeared to be a hopeless situation. David's story is a powerful reminder that we must not let fear or doubt control us when facing big challenges. Like David, we are called to trust that God is bigger than any problem or difficulty we face. Our faith can move mountains, just as David's faith in God allowed him to defeat a giant. Even when we feel inadequate or unprepared, like David with his sling and stone, we can trust that God will equip us for the task at hand. The key is not to focus on our weaknesses, but to trust that God is with us, giving us the strength we need to succeed. The lessons of faith, courage, and trust that we learn from David are still incredibly relevant today, especially when we face difficulties and obstacles in our lives. Whether it's a personal challenge, a health issue, a difficult relationship, or any other form of adversity, David's example encourages us to rely on God and trust in his power. Just as God helped David overcome Goliath, he will help us overcome the challenges in our lives, no matter how big they may seem. David's story teaches us that no matter the size of our problems, God is always bigger, and with him, we can face anything. David's courage also shows us the importance of standing firm in our beliefs, even when others around us may doubt or be fearful. When the Israelite army was paralyzed by fear, David didn't follow the crowd. He followed God's calling and acted according to what he believed was right. As Christians today, we are often faced with situations where the majority may not share our faith or values. David's example encourages us to stay strong in our faith, trusting that God will give us the courage to stand firm, even in the face of opposition. In conclusion, David's life and victory over Goliath offer valuable lessons for all of us today. His unshakable faith, courage in the face of the impossible, and reliance on God's strength rather than His own are lessons we can apply to our lives. When we face challenges, let's remember that, like David, we can trust in God to give us the strength to overcome. David's story reminds us that with faith in God, no challenge is too big, and with courage, we can face anything that comes our way. In conclusion, we've seen how David, a young shepherd, defeated the giant Goliath with the help of God. His victory was not just a physical triumph, but a powerful demonstration of faith and courage. By trusting in God's power and not relying on his own strength, David changed the course of Israel's history and became a symbol of what it means to have unwavering faith, even when facing impossible challenges. His story reminds us that God can use anyone, regardless of age or experience, to accomplish great things. David's courage and faith can inspire us today to face our own giants. Just as David trusted in God to defeat Goliath, we can trust in God to help us overcome the obstacles in our lives. Think about the challenges you are currently facing. How can you apply the faith and courage David showed in your own life? How can you rely more on God's strength and less on your own abilities? Reflect on these questions and allow David's example to encourage you to step forward with courage and confidence, knowing that God is with you. We all have giants in our lives, things that seem too big to overcome. But just as David showed, we are not alone in facing them. With God on our side, we can face any challenge. David didn't see Goliath as an undefeatable enemy. He saw him as an opportunity for God to display his power. This is how we should approach our own challenges, not as obstacles that are too big to handle, but as opportunities for God to show His greatness through us. David's story also teaches us that true strength comes from God, not from our own abilities or resources. When David faced Goliath, he didn't rely on armor, weapons, or military experience. He relied on God. In the same way, we can face life's challenges by trusting in God's power, not our own. As we step into situations that feel beyond our control, we can remember that our strength comes from the Lord, and with His help, nothing is impossible. As we finish, I want to leave you with a powerful reminder from 1 Samuel 17 verse 45. You come against me with sword and spear, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty. This verse reminds us that no matter the size of our challenges, God is greater. Our strength doesn't come from physical weapons or our own power. It comes from God. Just as David defeated Goliath through God's strength, we too can face any difficulty with the confidence that God is fighting for us. Let David's example of faith and courage inspire you. Whatever giants you are facing today, remember that with God, you are more than a conqueror. Trust in His power, stand firm in your faith, and know that no challenge is too great for the Lord Almighty.